Good morning and welcome to the breakfast meeting. I am Mordecai Mlisa, and I always start with saying thank you so much for keeping your eyes on NBS TV. Well, this is one of those mornings that I really want to talk about things I am extremely interested in. And guess what? It is oil, gas, and mining. And you know why? I always say that I'm discussing a very huge investment in the country. I mean, an investment that is worth $6 billion US, half of our gross domestic product. So, you know, that is an extremely huge and very important discussion to have this wonderful morning. I'll take you back with what happened in Parliament, that is in 2019, when it was able to pass the National Law Content Bill, and then it became into law on 20th May 2020, and now awaits the President's assent. So our question or our discussion this wonderful morning is going to be surrounding the National Content Bill or Act or law and its implication on the oil, gas, and the mining sector in Uganda. And with me this wonderful morning, it is Nicholas Ecimu, the Council Member, Uganda Chamber of Mines and Petroleum, and partner Sebalo and Lule Advocates, and Pamela Natamba, Council Member, Uganda Chamber of Mines and Petroleum, and partner PwC. Well, good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. I will start with you, Pamela. Because of the saying, ladies first. So let me be the first one to embrace this. What is the national local content and why is it important?
Thank you very much, Mordecai, and good morning, viewers and listeners. It's an honor, first of all, for me to speak about the subject of local content as we continue to sensitize Ugandans about what's happening in the oil and gas sector and in the mining sector. And thanks to NBS for continuing to partner with the Uganda Chamber of Mines and Petroleum in this important initiative. Now, back to your question, local content, sometimes referred to as national content. Other people refer to it as national participation. Mm-hmm. What is it? It is a development strategy that is aimed at maximizing benefits from projects, resource projects that companies, national, different countries do carry and hold. And it is not just developing or maximizing benefits from those projects, but also making sure that you use these benefits to transform the rest of the economy. Mm. Secondly, it is also about transforming foreign direct investment into local economic development. That is a very important aspect of national content. So it's about how do I add value? How do I create value through utilization of local or national resources? And we've seen it mainly used by resource-rich countries, especially around the extractive industry. And we've also now seen it extending beyond the extractive industry into significant projects like infrastructure projects. And perhaps Nicholas, being the lawyer in this practice and understands the laws, will speak about it at some point. What does value addition or value creation look like in this context? It is about creating jobs. It is about developing local entrepreneurs. It is about the ability to transfer skills and technology. So you have all these natural resources, but what you do with them eventually is what is critical, because it's not just about getting revenues from these resources, but it's about using everything possible to transform the rest of the economy. Now, what is it not? You know, sometimes, and we've seen different definitions of local content by different users, depending on what they are seeking to achieve. But one of the things that I would like to emphasize is that it is not just about getting nationals to participate in form of equity ownership, because equity ownership may not necessarily transform into development of the economy. And I am not saying there shouldn't be equity ownership, but I'm saying there should be a balance between equity ownership and creation of value as national content is intended to achieve. And it's for basic reasons. One, because if you've just talked about $6 billion US dollars.
Yeah, 16 billion.
We know the significance of projects like the pipeline, the refinery, how much money is involved. If we're going to go mainly to equity ownership, not many Ugandans are going to have money to invest in those kinds of projects. And so if your only focus is around equity ownership, you're not likely to get sufficient investors within the country. And secondly, we know that equity ownership it will mainly lead to recouping your return on investment, say through dividends. But what about these other things that I've talked about? Are you creating jobs? Are you developing local entrepreneurs? Or are you just focusing on a few individuals that have been successful and are able to invest in the sector and will reap dividends out of this? So I'll pack it there for now.
Thank you so much, and that sounds extremely brilliant. Coming to you, like she said in her submission that, I'm talking to a lawyer. What steps has Uganda taken to achieve the desired local content in the country? And one person that is watching could ask, how applicable is it to the mining as well as the oil and gas sector?
Thank you very much, Mordecai. Good morning, viewers and listeners. We are very grateful for this opportunity because as the Chamber of Mines and Petroleum, what we strive for is to try and make sure people have correct information around about what the laws say about local content, and we're not short of them. In Uganda, we have in 2013 the parliament passed 2 significant laws to govern the petroleum sector, and those laws have embedded in them the requirements for local content or national content. You have the Petroleum Exploration, Development and Production Act. It's a mouthful, so we always like to call it the Upstream Act that manages exploration and development. So everything that you're hearing about today about CNOOC and Total is governed under that law. Then we have a second piece of law, which is called the Petroleum Refining, Conversion, Transmission, and Midstream Storage Act, which is the Midstream Act that manages the pipeline infrastructure, the storage facilities, and all these laws actually do provide for local content. The government has also gone ahead to pass regulations under those laws that ring-fence certain services, which they have looked at carefully, scoped through stakeholder engagements, and figured out that there are certain things that we can surely encourage our people to be engaged in terms of adding value and developing their own skills and enterprise. And I know that at some point my colleague Pamela will talk about some of those ring-fenced areas for the people of Uganda. Even in mining, the Mining Act that we have is a bit old. It's 2003. There's been a lot of change over the time around about making it better. There are discussions. There's already a mining bill that's been drafted, and we're going to see probably a back-to-back replica of what the regulations under the Petroleum Acts provide for national content in terms of mining. But otherwise, under the Mining Act, we have provisions around about training of Ugandans. You cannot apply for a mining lease unless you've actually demonstrated how you're going to train Ugandans and transfer technology. It goes as far as asking you to actually provide a budget in your mining plan of how this training is going to be done. So when you look at the bill currently, the mining bill that is being considered, certainly we are bound to see regulations that will prescribe, like they did in the petroleum sector, of how Ugandans can participate. Not only are the laws there to provide the framework for this, we've also seen the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda government policy that seeks to try and encourage people to buy Ugandan manufactured goods and source services from Ugandan entities. And we think this is a step in the right direction, but clearly a policy is only a policy as good as the law can back it up. And I think where we needed to try and push it a little forward is to then have government say, okay, what kind of law should we pass to underpin this? I know of the national content, local content bill that my colleague talked about. It was passed by parliament. Everybody believed, okay, this is going to work for us. It's going to make sure every Ugandan is participating. Obviously, I have a few comments and concerns, and we've talked about this bill extensively. It tends to be an en masse bill. If you look at what they've done in the petroleum sector and probably what they're doing in the mining sector, you realize that some of the things can only be specific. You can legislate for a particular sector. Whereas there may be sectors where it is, almost a natural fit with the, Ugandan enterprise. You may find that, some of the high-tech sectors would require a bit more time and training. So you cannot, for example, prescribe and say, for you to benefit from local content legislation, you ought to be either a Ugandan company or you have to demonstrate that you're sourcing all your goods from Uganda. Because that comes with its own challenges. Then we also have, obviously, challenges around, international protocol that we've signed up to. Are you going to close out people from East Africa, for example, from participating in opportunities here if they so wish to participate? So there are challenges around the bill. I think there should have been a bit of thought process around the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda policy and government taking lead on the national local content bill to try and make sure it speaks and sits comfortably with government commitments internationally, but also with the bill in its current form. Besides that, we've also seen a lot of, I practice in the infrastructure space a lot, and we've seen a lot of projects, standard gauge, huge hydro power plants like Karuma. You realize that government is increasingly providing contractual obligations for contractors. Buy 20% locally manufactured goods. We want to see 20% of Ugandans employed, not only as casual laborers, people pushing the wheelbarrows, but actually as site engineers, surveyors, and things like that. So we are seeing that trend growing from project to project, and I believe that as time goes on, a lot of these things will be embedded in one form of the law or the other. I think I'll probably park it there for now.
And indeed, it is very important, and I can feel the sense of patriotism when you talk about where you want Ugandans to be. Let's talk about this mega project and how Ugandans are going to participate in this sector. How do these provisions, all of them that we're talking about, benefit Ugandans?
Thank you, Mordecai. So Nicholas has started it off. There are laws that have been put in place. And the intention in those laws is to make sure that there are clear policies and guidelines in terms of how Ugandans will participate. And I must commend the government, and I believe we've started off on the right footing, because as Nicholas has mentioned, the provisions in there have focused on how do we create value in Uganda and for Ugandans, just like I defined the national content concept. One of the things that have been provided for is employment of Ugandans. Broadly in the National Content Private Members Bill, but even more specifically in the oil and gas regulations and provisions. And it's gone to the level of being able to define, we need 70% of Ugandans employed in this sector. Gone ahead to say it's not just any employment, but we also need a certain percentage employed at the managerial level. Now, it goes ahead to describe the sort of plans that the oil companies should put in place to ensure that this is achieved. So the oil companies are actually supposed to present to government a plan that says this is what we are going to do to be able to employ Ugandans. And this is what we are going to do to be able to impart skills where we have failed to employ Ugandans and we have ended up employing somebody else other than a Ugandan. There's going to be a plan, a succession plan, being able to train a Ugandan to take on that position eventually. So that's a good starting point. Use of local raw materials, and I think Nicholas also alluded to that. It has clearly provided for use of local raw materials, use of local goods and services where they are available. I guess the key issue is where they are available and where we have the right quality and standards. So that is very critical. But there is a provision already saying if there is a Ugandan out there who is able to deliver certain goods or deliver certain services, let's give the first opportunity to them, provided they meet the required quality and the required standards. The third point that has been provided for is around transfer of skills and also technology. So it's not just skills that are learned on the job, but even transfer of technology. The other one that has been provided for is encouraging partnerships with local entrepreneurs. It is easy to have such a resource, would generate revenues out of it, we are done with the resource, it's exhausted, and before we know it, we just remain the same as we were before we found that resource. So developing local entrepreneurs to allow them to participate meaningfully in these sectors, to acquire the skills that they require, and even transfer those skills to other sectors of the economy. We are not going to have oil forever. It's not an infinite resource. At some point, 25 years down the road, that's the estimate, we will have exhausted this oil. What happens? So the ability to impart skills and transfer technology and enable local entrepreneurs to be sustainable in the future has been provided for. Then there have been certain services that have been specifically ring-fenced for Ugandans. So this is to say, for these particular services, let's first give priority to Ugandans. And I'm sure Ugandans out there are keen to hear what these services are. Examples like transportation services, examples like foods and beverages, civil works. There was someone who was complaining that it looks like they've only given Ugandans the softer services or the ones that don't generate a lot of money. But there have been technical services that have been ring-fenced. I've talked about civil works. There are land surveying, environmental and impact assessment. So there's quite a broad range of services that we Ugandans should prepare ourselves to benefit from.
Thank you so much. Now, let's talk about the challenges. Do you foresee some of them in seeking to implement the national content and the entire economy as proposed by the National Content Bill together with the rest of the legislations?
Thank you very much, Mordecai. Clearly, in situations like this, you always choose to fix a problem, and sometimes you have unintended consequences.
Oh, yeah.
It naturally happens. Yes. And I think probably trying to apply the local content bill en masse comes with its own challenges, because there are certain, just like I said before, there are certain sectors that are very specific in the way you can operate in them. One of the challenges that I see with the local content bill in its current form is what I alluded to earlier on, the challenge of how it interacts with our international obligations, naturally. But above all, where I sit, I would still think that, maybe we needed to try and, build it incrementally. You can't wake up one fine day and say, we want you to demonstrate that, 48% of, all foreign companies, if they are to benefit from, some of the things that the law is trying to provide here, ought to be owned by Ugandans. We know that not so many people will give you a free carry. In corporate law, we call it free carry. If somebody is nice enough to you to say, I'm giving you 48% of my shares, don't pay for it. Most of these equity contributions actually come with money. So if you're going to be given a project where you have to invest, say, $200 million, and you have to fork it out of equity. You bring your money, I bring mine, we form a company and be able to implement this project. Not so many Ugandans will be able to fork out about $90 million to try and take their 48% equity stake in a company like that. So we will certainly see a struggle of Ugandan companies meeting that threshold. Unless obviously we then go to the black market. You give me 48%, but you make me sign off everything, including my children, that actually this thing belongs to you. So you actually have a cosmetic arrangement where everybody believes, yes, there's a Ugandan front, but behind it, it's underpinned by a lot of legal documentation, which takes back the whole value. So that defeats the purpose of the law. You will also have challenges around duplication of roles. If you look at the National Local Content Bill, it actually provides that there has to be a unit formed under the Ministry of Finance to monitor implementation of local content. That may be a good start, yes. But if you look at some of the far-reaching things that the bill provides, you have to be able to demonstrate that you're meeting all these obligations. If you don't, they can take away some of your tax-deductible expenses, which is a preserve of the URA, certainly. So URA is the one under the Act that is allowed to tamper with tax. It has far-reaching obligations in terms of public procurement. So some of the things like the reservation schemes that were provided for under the PPDA Act almost tend to become in conflict with this current new law. So somebody has to figure out how will it work with PPDA. Do you amend the PPDA Act to make it sit well with this particular bill at this point in time? you have a duplication around about the roles that the Petroleum Authority of Uganda is already playing in the acts that we told you about in the petroleum sector, upstream and midstream. They have a very elaborate, oversight process of making sure, local content is being, provided sufficiently. So, you will have all those, various organizations, clamoring for the same space. And that is bound to cause challenges. The other thing is just basically, what we talked about earlier on, it can only be sector specific. Because I don't think that local content will apply to the petroleum sector as it will apply to telecom, as it will apply to, for example, the agricultural sector. So I think, to me, the best way would have been to try and unpack them and say, what do we do with respective sectors? Then let the sectors grow organically to a point where you feel, Ugandan enterprise is beginning to take a lead. Then you can see how do you protect them and make sure you empower them to be able to even provide more value. You will have challenges around about financing. What is government doing? Are you going to fund UDB so that people can actually come with, good ideas? And if they don't have money genuinely, maybe that is where UDB then steps in. Or do you take it to Uganda Development Corporation? If you notice, in the earlier days, UDC used to be the investment arm of government. So maybe those are some of the structures we need to be looking at as Ugandans to see how we can take benefit of this sector in a way that will provide real value for the sector.
We first used our time, and then I'll start with you with giving your concluding remark. What is that one thing that you don't want to leave this place without mentioning, without failing to mention?
Okay. I guess for me, it is asking Ugandans the question of how ready are we? We have the laws that are seeking to support participation of the Ugandans. With the challenges that Nicholas has pointed out, it is still a good start in my view. So do we as Ugandans understand what is happening in the sector? Have we sensitized ourselves enough? And are we starting to prepare ourselves and have conversations with the relevant authorities? That is to the Ugandans. My second point is a local content policy is only as good as the country's ability to implement it and enforce it. So my point goes to the government of Uganda to say we must be prepared to make sure that we make these local content policies and regulations work by enforcing them correctly and continuously developing them so that they can meet our needs. Thank you.
In just a few seconds.
Okay, thank you very much. To our viewers, there could be no better time to be a Ugandan as we look at the dawn of oil and gas, look at the dawn of commercializing mining. These two sectors have been there for a while, but you realize they've been dormant. Please take advantage of what the laws provide. Register on the National Supplier Database. Petroleum Authority of Uganda is very open. They normally enlist people on the National Supplier Database, and that is where most international companies will look for first. They will come and look at that, look at what you've uploaded as your profile, what you say you do. They will get in touch with you, and somebody's doing your free marketing for you. The other is just to, as my colleague Pamela said, for the government to get its acts in order. You can have all these beautiful things if you don't enforce them. And I can talk from my experience. In the project space, sometimes we sign these contracts, give them 20% and all that. But nobody goes back to check, how many Ugandans are actually employed, how much of the goods from Uganda that you said you are going to buy have actually been bought and applied in the project. Otherwise, besides that, ours is just to wish Ugandans well. As a Chamber of Mines and Petroleum, we will always try to be out there, provide the correct information. Luckily, we have it. So we will try as much as possible to partner with people like NBS and everybody who can, be a messenger of this information to make sure people have the right information and prepare themselves appropriately. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, and thank you so much, Pamela, for paying a visit to us. Well, we just cannot go beyond this, but the best or one thing that you have said is Ugandans are sensitizing themselves about this. I always want to talk about how huge or mega this project is, worth $16 billion US, and that is half of our gross domestic product. You want to be part of this and know where our money is going to be spent and how Uganda will look like in 20, 30, or 50 years to come and more. I am Mordecai Mlisa. It is the first half of the breakfast meeting. We are coming back shortly.